Hello and welcome to another episode of Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear, the podcast conversation with a changemaker working to accelerate the transition to a sustainable carbon neutral society. I'm your host, Mitch Ratcliffe. Let's talk about optimism. Climate change is the second global existential threat resulting from the industrial era, a time that has given us nuclear weapons, explosive population growth that exceeds the carrying capacity of the planet, and greenhouse gas emissions, which led, of course, to climate change. It often feels like a very dark and foreboding time, but we're joined today by an optimist, a climate optimist, Peter Feikowsky, who is founder of the Foundation for Climate Restoration and author of a new book, Climate Restoration, The Only Future That Will Sustain the Human Race. Peter is a climate optimist, and he himself shook me out of my own pessimism when we met at the Earth Day Gala in 2018. I was standing in a hotel ballroom in Washington, D.C., thinking that parties weren't going to save the planet, when Peter apparently figured out that I was a writer and made a beeline for me. He pitched his ideas right then and there, telling me that we could reverse climate change with carbon capture technology and natural carbon sequestration strategies and end climate change by 2050. In his book, he argues that the energy transition is well underway and could lead to net zero emissions by 2030. But that is just the beginning of the end of the climate challenge, because we have to remove the trillions of tons of human-generated excess carbon emissions from the atmosphere that are just sitting there warming the planet. We have to remove that to begin to reverse climate change. Before we start, I just want to make a disclosure. I am a supporter of the Foundation for Climate Restoration and participate in its Washington State chapter. You can learn more about Peter at peterfeikowsky.com. Fiekowsky is spelled F-I-E-K-O-W-S-K-Y, peterfeikowsky.com, no space, no dash. Peter, welcome back to Sustainability in Your Ear. It's great to have you, and you wrote a fascinating book. I want to start by asking just a very broad-based question, which is, you do have a very optimistic outlook on the prospects for ending the climate crisis. Yeah. What are the reasons that you feel that we can reach net zero by 2030 and draw down to 350 parts per million, which was the pre-industrial level, by 2050?
Yes.
How can you say that?
Yes. Well, first, Mitch, thank you for having me back on. It's a pleasure. Mm-hmm. A little correction is getting CO2 below 300, not 350. 350 okay. Is the sort of the 50-50 point of we might make it, we might not.
Okay.
Why am I optimistic? It's an engineering problem. You and I, before we started here, were talking about the Y2K problem, which was huge. But we took it on, we engineers took it on, and engineering managers took it on as an engineering problem and solved it. And this is the same thing.
Well, in terms of, for instance, getting to net zero by 2030, what about the energy transition's progress to date suggests that we can get to a point where we really literally could be running the economy without any aggregate additional emissions by 2030?
Well, I separate out the two issues. So the amount of CO2 going into the atmosphere is one issue, and you reduce the amount of fossil fuel usage. You can either eliminate demand, which, and going extinct is an option that you and I definitely don't want, but that would definitely get us to zero emissions quickly, and much more sensibly is we continue what we're doing, because that's what we do, but we're using clean energy instead. And so to do that, you've got to build the 20,000 gigawatts of clean energy capacity generation. And we know how to do that. We know exactly how to do that.
Do we have the financial and political wherewithal to do so?
We do, because the amount that we need to invest in it is less than we would be investing in fossil fuel, and so the money is there. We were promised at COP27, 26, whatever it was in Glasgow, $130 trillion of environmental sustainability and governance funds. We only need 30 trillion. So the 20,000 gigawatts times $1.5 per watt for wind and solar is $30 trillion over the next 30 years. Not a problem at all. And we're going to do it. That is, for investors, for young investors, they're all going into clean energy. The old investors, they'll die eventually, but they made their fortune on fossil fuel, and they'll probably believe in it till they die. But that's okay.
Okay, so progress is the generations taking over from one another, and the younger generation and younger investors are headed in the right direction. So let's talk about CO2's forcing the warming of the climate.
Yeah.
How much CO2, anthropogenic CO2, is in the atmosphere, and how quickly do we need to draw it down to prevent the really catastrophic scenarios that we've heard about with regard to climate change?
Well, I personally believe we're in a catastrophic scenario right now. So preventing it, well, I'm sorry, we're in it. So then you need I take a different approach, and I say, where is it we want to be? And I use the analogy of a safe harbor. So when a ship is in stormy seas, a captain will say, okay, we're going straight to the nearest safe harbor. That the safe harbor is placed the captain and the ship have been before safely. And if a PhD mate says, hey, I know this island, I think it's great, I think we'll probably be okay there, the captain's gonna say, no, that's fine, thank you for your advice, and I'll label you IPCC. I'm going to the safe harbor we've been to. And that's the CO2 level we had for 10,000 stable years that allowed us to develop agriculture and civilization. And that's 280 parts per million.
Now, in terms of financing and policy coming around to these views, you believe the money is going to flow to support several things. And you talk about this in the book. There's low carbon concrete, ocean iron fertilization, which is a way of stimulating phytoplankton growth, and enhanced atmospheric methane oxidation, or EAMO, which removes methane from the atmosphere by allowing it to oxidize, accelerating the natural oxidation process. Those are four big areas of work. Do you see, for instance, and let's just start with low carbon cement, industry migrating to that already?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I was yesterday at a monthly meeting at Blue Planet Systems. They love me and my book, which promotes them. And they're getting more demand for factories than they know what to do with. And so they're still improving their chemistry and making really good rocks. Making rocks isn't too hard. Making really good rocks, that's much better than nature, which is what we Silicon Valley people do. That takes a lot of work. And so they're still enhancing their formula. And so they're delaying a year or so.
So before we get into the other topics that we were talking about, tell us about Blue Planet. We talked about it before on the show. The figures are incredible with regard to how much CO2 that they can store in each cubic yard of concrete that they make.
Yeah.
What's involved in that process? And you mentioned that they've kind of delayed a bit because of refinements, but where are we going with that? How much CO2 can that concrete sequester over the next couple of decades?
Yeah. So each cubic yard or cubic meter sequesters about a ton of CO2. And we make a lot of roads and buildings on our planet. It comes out amazingly to 7 tons of concrete per man, woman, and child every year. It's amazing. And
given that, and I mean, the fact that's 1,000 kilograms per yard, that sounds like that's a big step in the right direction. So what percentage of emissions could we start to reverse simply by switching over from traditional Portland concrete to this enhanced version?
We could pretty quickly, we could go to 7 gigatons. And so that would be about 1/6 of our global emissions could be absorbed this way quite quickly. And then and that's just using emissions from power plants and steel mills and so on. if you, they have the technology and they tested it to take the CO2 from the air as well. Mm-hmm. And when you do that, then you could go all the way to all of our current emissions.
So essentially offset our current emissions simply by sequestering every year as much as we would currently emit.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm starting to see the 2030 being possible. Now ocean iron fertilization is a controversial, but apparently pretty effective approach to reducing actually sequestering emissions. Yes. Tell us how it works.
Well, it involves growing plants in the ocean. So all of us know about growing trees, and we all know that trees they're small for a few decades, and then they're big enough to make a big dent, and then a few decades later they die, and then a few years later they rot, and the CO2 goes back into the air, or the carbon goes back into the air. In the ocean, when you grow plants, most of them get eaten, but the detritus from the plants and the fish that eat them falls to the middle of the ocean. And maybe 10% falls to the bottom, but it stays there suspended. And this is how nature produces ice ages. So this has happened 10 times in the last million years, where nature has removed that trillion tons that we're going to be removing. I'm saying we're going to remove it, or we could say try, but I don't think we're going to give up. I don't have anything better to do. And so then the way you get those plants to grow, the phytoplankton, also called algae, is with iron. And so when I think of the ocean, I think of the blue ocean around Hawaii, all over the tropics. But blue is beautiful, but it's not green. Green is when you've got things growing. And so how you turn blue ocean green? Well, there's obviously already water, already sunlight, and lots of nutrients. And the missing nutrient is iron. The amount of iron that they add to turn it blue to green is about 1 milligram per square meter. So that's 1/100th of a teaspoon of iron ore dust per square meter or square yard.
So you could essentially trawl the ocean, seeding iron and stimulating blooms of algae. That algae grabs CO2, breathes out oxygen, and as it dies, it sinks into the ocean, sequestering the carbon.
Yeah.
How much would it cost to make a major dent, say, for instance, 10 gigatons of CO2 removed from the atmosphere?
Well, the test that was done in 2012 in the Gulf of Alaska cost about a total of $2.5 million, and sequestered 10 times that, 100 megatons. And so the immediate answer to your question is a couple $100,000.
Okay, that's an incredible figure given the level of climate-related damage we see every year.
That's right.
Which is somewhere in the $300 billion range at this point, just from extreme weather. So for a tiny fraction of that, we could begin to substantially reduce atmospheric CO2.
Yeah. The way it's done is not trawling the ocean. Scientifically they do that because it's better control. In practice, they do it inside of eddies so that the water is contained and the ecosystem can actually evolve over a period of months, and that's how you get the best results.
And folks, I'm shorthanding what I'm asking because Peter's book goes into this in great detail and explains it quite clearly. I urge you to read it. Let's go to the last of the technological solutions that you talked about, which is enhanced atmospheric methane oxidation. We pump a lot of methane into the atmosphere. It's 28 more times powerful in terms of the warming as just CO2. And there's some very serious concerns about methane burps from submerged ocean frozen methane and thawing permafrost. So we could see a rapid acceleration of heating if we don't deal with this. How does EAMO work?
Yeah, so methane, nature oxidizes methane naturally with a half-life of about 8 years. and the EAMO doubles that rate. That's the plan. It could triple it if we need to, and it uses one of the two methods that NH uses, in this case, chlorine radicals that are held in place with iron chloride. And so you have an iron atom with 3 chlorines in a very, 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 very fine mist, which nature does as well. And then sunlight will knock a chlorine out, and that chlorine, like chlorine bleach, will oxidize a methane molecule that might be nearby. And so the iron chloride is vaporized into ship exhaust over the ocean.
So you essentially distribute this by burning fuel that is enhanced with these elements.
Yeah, although in practice, it'll be an evaporator next to the engine. Putting stuff inside of a ship engine, the engine, the guy who does insurance on the engine says, don't do that.
Okay. Now, the incredible figure that you cited in the book is that if we were to make just a few $1 billion investment in the EAMO approach, that we could get back to 2005 CO2 levels in a few years.
Yes.
Why aren't we doing that?
Well, to be precise, to 2005 warming levels, and we're working on it. The biggest problem is we've been trying to get funding for a year and a half, and we're getting close, but we're not there yet. The funding we need is $2 to $8 million, which isn't a lot. The people who would invest, they don't like being outside the norm. And so since this would actually correct the climate as opposed to stop making it worse, everyone's thinking, let's stop making the climate worse. The idea of actually making it survivable again is a new idea. And so what the important thing right now is to promote the idea of climate restoration, that we do want a climate that humans have survived over in long term.
Well, and that raises the paradox of the moral hazard. A lot of environmentalists are concerned, and I have shared that concern at various points, although I do see a lot of reasoning that supports this position.
Yeah.
That doing these projects somehow gives a pass to the fossil fuel industry and consumers to continue to burn fossil fuels. When confronted with that challenge, how do you respond? Because that is what I believe blocks a lot of the policy decisions and discussions that we need to have.
Yeah. Well, you can't prove it, of course, and it may well be true that it was certainly true that if we reduced CO2 back to pre-industrial, back to 280, it would be very hard to blame the oil companies for something where we've restored the climate. Now, then the question is our goal to blame the oil companies, or is our goal to restore the climate? Mm-hmm. And some people haven't asked themselves that question yet. And they thought that if they blamed the oil companies, that would restore the climate, but they're actually separate issues. So that's how I respond is it depends on your goal. If your goal is to blame the oil companies, you should definitely not restore the climate. If your goal is to restore the climate, you should restore the climate.
Fascinating, Peter. Let's take a short break. I need to run a commercial. We'll be right back.
Great.
We're back. We're talking with Peter Feikowsky. He is the founder of the Foundation for Climate Restoration and also the author of the new book, Climate Restoration, The Only Future That Will Sustain the Human Race. So, Peter, following up on what you said just before we took our break, there's an engineering solution to the fact that previous and bad engineering, wasteful engineering, produced the climate crisis.
Yeah.
There's an engineering solution. But does this suggest that in the long term, what we really are moving towards is managing our atmosphere in some way? A global air conditioning system is the best way I can think to describe what we're trying to build. But there's sci-fi examples. Star Trek has a global atmospheric management system in one of the movies.
Yeah.
Are we rethinking our relationship with nature to the point where we are literally going to collaborate with it to create the environment that is good for us?
Yes, absolutely. And if we don't, then we go extinct, and there's no one to tell the story that we screwed up. But if assuming that we have someone to tell the story, we will have controlled the climate. It's really that simple.
So, in terms of thinking about the policies, you're suggesting, and you do this effectively in the book, that we're looking through the wrong end of the telescope at this problem. That we've focused down on ending emissions as though that somehow solves the problem, when the problem is really that we need to take all the excess CO2 out of the atmosphere. That means that a lot of the conversation that we have about the threats of technology and overpopulation and other forms of consumption associated with so many more people being on the planet are not well placed, but they are relevant. What is the suite of solutions that we need to think about as a society to reduce both our emissions and get back to the 280 parts per million, which was where my great-grandparents would have lived?
Right. Well, I have two answers. The first direct answer is the big four I talk about in the book, which you mentioned: the iron fertilization, the synthetic limestone, seaweed, and the methane oxidation. But much more important is the question you asked a minute ago, which is, are we going to control our planet so that humans can survive and flourish? And that question had never needed to be asked and has never been asked before. The book, Climate Restoration, The Only Future That Will Sustain the Human Race, asks that question. The answer, I think, is pretty obvious. I've not yet met someone who said, no, let's not do it. Let us go extinct. So that's the critical thing, is deciding to do it. Once you decide to do it, the solutions are almost obvious. And so I don't emphasize so much the solutions as I do, listen, we've got to decide that we're going to stick around. And I mentioned the safe harbor. You got to get clear what it is you want.
Well, I'm reminded of the statement from Stuart Brand, the founder of the Whole Earth Catalog, that we are as gods and had better get good at it.
Yes.
So we have a lot of tools, and thinking about a lot of those tools includes thinking about policies. You talk about population growth. Do we need a population policy to reduce the planet's growth, or do we need, or are we already taking care of it in some way?
It's an interesting question, and it's definitely a yes/no answer. What we find is that a population policy almost always backfires. So China had a one-child policy, and when they instituted it, their birth rate went up 15%, and then the birth rate went down along with everyone else's birth rate on the planet, and especially in Asia. And then when they stopped it because they not presumably wanted to increase their birth rate, then the birth rate went down rather than back up. And so the point is that policies usually backfire. So then the question is, okay, good, if we want a sustainable population, now the UN talks about a stable population, and inside of the Malthusian population growing until everything collapses, the UN makes sense. Stabilize it, and then eventually it'll collapse, but hopefully that'll be not in our generation and hopefully not in our kids. A sustainable population, again, is one where nature has shown over many, many thousands of years, this is the maximum population our planet can hold and have a healthy society, because any society that had more children than that was weakened enough so that a neighboring culture took them over. So we know that that nature gave us a pretty solid maximum.
What is that maximum?
Well, if you look at the graph of population that I have in the book, it's about 1 billion people, or actually 1 billion people under 40 back in 1750. And then it started skyrocketing. I call it 2 billion. And as we get closer, we'll understand. We're at 8 billion now. And so and I call it 2 billion just because our life expectancy has doubled from about 40 to about 80 now.
So one of the things we've learned, and Hans Rosling did a lot of analysis of this, is that prosperity is probably the best way to control our population. People stop having so many children because they no longer need to worry about being cared for when they're older. They don't die, all the children don't die. If we move back downward, and your number of 2 billion matches what we've heard from several IPCC contributors as well. 2 to 2.5 billion is the ideal carrying capacity for human population. That's a very different world than we live in.
Now, some people are saying 500 million because we've destroyed so much of our ecosystems.
Well, and
anyway, just a data point. It doesn't change anything right now.
But thinking about what we live, how we live on the world and with the world, that also leaves a lot more room for nature to do its thing. Yeah. So going back to the question of what should we be doing? I mean, I do think that we need to change our consumption to encourage sustainable options, and we need to lower our population by simply having fewer children and investing more in those kids. You know, we might fix education simply by stopping having so many children.
It's very easy. Yeah, you know, the school is there. If the number of kids in the school goes down by 30%, those kids are going to have a lot more attention.
Well, and then so should we be also thinking about restoration? To what degree should we be thinking about environmental restoration? Generally, people agree that we need 1/3 of the planet to be wilderness. Could we go further, or do we need to go further?
I haven't studied it. I think 30% would be fine. That is, yeah, but because you know, essentially we need preserves, we need pathways for animals and plants to go back and forth. But you know, and when the human population goes back, you know, down significantly, then it'll be easy to recreate those pathways. So this is the population that was just 100 years ago, the factor of 4. And you know, the main way to do it, what's interesting, if you read the population chapter, you'll see, you know, there's the myth that it's sort of a myth that increasing education, it makes families smaller. It actually, the data says it's upside down, that having smaller families immediately increases education.
To the earlier point.
Yes. Yeah, and so the countries that focused on targeting small families, their economies boomed compared to, you know, similar countries where they said, well, let's educate girls, and you know, we're Catholic, so we think we should have big families.
It's interesting to me, looking at the climate debate here in the United States, it seems to be cast between people who are thinking purely about leave nature alone and those who are saying, we don't even care about nature. It's not a problem. But the reality is somewhere very much in the middle and takes pieces of both through negotiation. But we have failed to have that negotiation. You've described a compelling potential future. Who do we need to bring to the table? And how can we do so in a democratic way that doesn't give the impression to a lot of folks that they are simply being told what to do? I think that's the problem we have here in the United States. Have you found ways to cross that chasm between yourself and people who are deniers or who are adamantly committed to fossil fuels? Or do we just have to let them die, like you said earlier?
Yeah. You know, I have friends and family who are climate deniers, and they're just being stubborn, which is, I think all of us are stubborn in one way or another. Mm-hmm. And so it's not like they're against humanity surviving, but they don't like being told what to do. And, you know, that's sort of fine. The question is, you know, I think the fundamental question you're asking is, how do we make this happen?
Yeah.
On the population, what I'm finding is there's only 15% of the population which controls whether we're going to be overpopulate and collapse or have a soft landing back at a sustainable. And that's at the women from 15 years old to 40. If they say we're going to have no more kids, that's it, you guys, then that's the end of humanity, right? Just that 15% of humanity owns our future. And so we have to support them, empower them to look to the future. Now, what's nice is if you think about it, or when I think about it, women tend to be very concerned about future generations. I think it's genetic. If I were developing genes, I would have the females be very concerned about the future and protective for the future. And you'll have men like you and me be very creative. And so allowing these women to really care about the future of humanity, they'll naturally have small families. Mm-hmm. I think it's really that easy. And then similarly with nature, we've lived in a world of Adam Smith, of the wealth of nations, of growing economy and the invisible hand, where we just let things grow. And I'm not going to say that's good or bad. That's just what we've been doing since 1776. And which also had Malthus saying, oh yeah, the population's also going to grow until it collapses. And then, it's a new story.
Yeah.
I call it a bar mitzvah for humanity, because as a child, you play around and you learn and you do new things. And if you burn down the garage, then the parents either rebuild the garage, or if you burn down the forest, they just move, and then Mother Nature takes care of the forest. When you're an adult, then you don't wait for someone else to repair it for you. Mm-hmm. You actually say, oh, good, I need to plan. Okay, we're going to move out of Florida because by the time my kids grow up, it's going to be flooded, and I want them to live in a nicer place. Mm-hmm. You plan. And so Adam Smith, really developed this playing field where children could play. Mm-hmm. And just build and explore, and took over the world. And well, now the world has changed and we're one humanity. The thing is, with the wealth of nations, if one nation fell, then another nation took over. And that was the whole idea, that the wealthier nation will dominate and the less wealthy nation will disappear. Well, that stage of evolution is complete. We're now one humanity. We intermarry, we travel, our economy is unified. And so now we need to, again, be adults. And that's what's needed, is just to look at ourselves as humanity, as I look at myself as the ancestor of future generations. Just like I have a little finger, and my little finger just does whatever is needed for my whole body. For me, I belong to humanity.
Responsibility. We have to acknowledge our responsibility to care for the planet, care for one another. It can be an inspiring idea. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't particularly want to care for other people, but we'll get there. Now, you do a lot of different things. There's the Foundation for Climate Restoration. You're working on several low carbon efforts. What's next for you and for the foundation? What should we be watching for as significant moments in the next couple of years?
Well, one of the things I'm working on right now is governance. And so people have over and over said, well, we can't restore the climate until we have governance. Mm-hmm. And I used to roll my eyes and say, yeah, who's going to do that?
Yeah.
Well, you know me a little bit now, Mitch, and you can probably guess. I realized, I guess I'm going to have to put together some sort of governance, because the U.S. can't govern the planet. The UN, that's not their job to govern it. It's just the United Nations. It's a meeting place. Mm-hmm. And so it seemed like too big a deal. But I asked one of my environmentalist leaders, well, what does successful governance look like? How do we know it was successful? She said, well, we restore the climate safely and rapidly. And I thought, well, as engineers, we know how to do that. And we know how to assure society that we're doing it. You do it openly.
Transparency is so critical. I mean, and unfortunately, I got a degree in political science, so I think about this too much. But your point about governance is well taken, but it also requires that we have dialogue.
Yes.
Transparency can facilitate that dialogue, but are you suggesting that there is a new organizational model for society, or are you suggesting that we simply that we're already on the path to a new way of determining how to use our resources.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what's interesting, backing up a little bit, is, as I say in the book, the cost of restoring the climate is about $2 billion a year. So that's, I think, 0.1% of the global budget.
It's very different than others, but I stipulate your argument.
Yeah, and so the people who will do it are primarily family offices. These are, offices like Bill Gates's or Michael Bloomberg's, and they accumulate wealth, and after a little while, they have as many cars and airplanes as they possibly want, and they say, everything I'm doing now is for future generations. Mm-hmm. And so these are the people who would easily invest the $2 billion a year or get together to do it. So doing it doesn't require a change. I think you're asking about the governance.
But it also has to do with the representation of the whole population, not simply the actions of a few people. You're right. You can demonstrate by doing it that you can change the atmosphere, but then to continue to govern the world. Yeah, that's what we're talking about, governing the relationship between people and the planet as well as between people. Does that require a different form of government than we have today?
I don't think so. I mean, there probably is a better form of government, but I'm a believer in play the cards you're dealt, and we're dealt these cards, and wishing they were different. If I have a queen of diamonds and I wish it were a queen of spades, it doesn't help. It disables me. And so what's interesting is, when Adam Smith in 1776 said, the wealth of nations, he transformed the world. Because all of our thinking, it doesn't matter whether you're pro or con. If you're a communist, you're still living in Adam Smith's world.
Yeah.
And so what we're doing is we're by restoring the climate, we're telling people, okay, we're living in a new world where humanity flourishes.
And so by acting, we express that, and the model simply emerges out of the form of government we have today. I think that could be very helpful for a lot of people if they just recognize that they do have that efficacy, that they are participating. I don't think everybody wants to wait for Bill Gates or Mike Bloomberg to do anything. Right. Happy to see it done, but everybody wants a voice. So it's going to be fascinating to see how that changes things. So how can folks follow along with what you're doing in the future?
Well, I've got my website, peterfeikowsky.com. Feikowsky is Fiekowsky. And the foundation is a great place to participate. So Foundation for Climate Restoration.org, or F4CR.org. They have local groups that they're forming around the world. And there are opportunities to get trained, to work with your representatives, to work with your newspapers, and work with your government, and really show people that we're shifting to restoring the climate.
Well, Peter, I want to thank you for taking time to talk with us today. It's been fascinating.
Great. Thank you, Mitch. This is a delightful conversation.
We've been talking with Peter Feikowsky, founder of the Foundation for Climate Restoration and author of the new book, Climate Restoration, The Only Future That Will Sustain the Human Race. And of course, we'll have a link to the book and how you can buy it in the article that goes with the podcast. I know this is going to be a controversial show. A lot of people feel as though we can't do anything that might give the impression that in the future, people can continue to emit carbon. But the engineering solution suggests that we may be able to allow some small amounts of carbon emissions and offset them, more than offset them, actually removing more CO2 as a result in the long run than we would burn, and get back to that 280 parts per million, which is really where our ancestors lived successfully for 10,000 years. Responsibility starts with each of us. We heard about governance and so forth, but we have to govern ourselves. And that means reducing our carbon impact so that we send signals into the economy that tell companies, we don't want that fossil fuel crap anymore. Please stop. That means choosing an EV, but also choosing a green source of energy, renewable energy, so that you're not relying on fossil fuel generated electricity to power that EV. You can do that in about half the states in the country now. Choose an energy provider that sources its generation from solar, wind, hydro, and other low carbon options. You can also, and this is the most important thing of all, choose to have a small family. Those are the kinds of things that are going to change our society and get us having the discussions that Peter and I talked about that will lead to a new realization of a social compact that is built around people's relationship with the planet. So make those small changes, send those signals. And I personally am trying to cut my carbon footprint by about 50% from what it was in 2019. I've made a number of choices that sometimes are fairly expensive, but have allowed me to do all of that and a little more. I'm a little more than halfway there. Read Earth911 to learn more about how we do that. This is Earth911 Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. We're going to be back to have another discussion, share more ideas to create less waste. I hope you'll take a few minutes to share this podcast and all the others we've done with your friends, family, coworkers. Take one of these to your boss and have a conversation about how your company can change its footprint. These are ideas we can all put to work. We'll be back soon. In the meantime, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.